Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez pressed her eye against the scope of her M4A1 carbine, watching the compound through the pre-dawn darkness. The intelligence had been wrong from the start. What was supposed to be a simple extraction mission in the mountains of Afghanistan had turned into a nightmare. The building they were meant to clear was crawling with enemy fighters, far more than the briefing had indicated. She counted at least 30 hostiles moving through the courtyard below, their AK-47s glinting in the moonlight. Her heart pounded as she realized the 12 Navy SEALs who had gone in 20 minutes ago were walking into a trap. The radio crackled with static, but no voices came through. Something had gone terribly wrong. Maya had been positioned on the ridge as Overwatch, specifically ordered to maintain her position and provide intelligence only. Her commanding officer, Colonel Barnes, had been crystal clear during the briefing. Rodriguez, you stay put no matter what happens down there. Your job is to watch and report, nothing more. These SEALs know their business. But as she watched through her scope, Maya could see muzzle flashes erupting from every window of the compound. The SEALs had been surrounded the moment they breached the main building. The mission was falling apart, and her radio remained ominously silent. Either their communications were jammed, or worse. Maya had been in the Army for 8 years, working her way up from private to staff sergeant through sheer determination and exceptional marksmanship skills. She had grown up hunting in the mountains of Colorado with her father, a Vietnam veteran who taught her that sometimes you had to make impossible choices. When lives are on the line, Maya, he used to say, you don't follow orders. You follow your conscience. The compound was a maze of interconnected buildings carved into the mountainside, with narrow alleyways and multiple levels. The enemy had chosen their position well. They had the high ground within the compound, while the SEALs were trapped in the lower levels. From her vantage point, Maya could see the tactical situation clearly. The SEAL team was pinned down in what appeared to be the main courtyard, taking fire from 3 different directions. Through her scope, she watched as one of the SEALs tried to move to a better position. A burst of automatic gunfire forced him back behind a concrete barrier. She could see at least 3 of them were wounded, lying motionless in the open area where their teammates couldn't reach them without exposing themselves to more enemy fire. Maya's training told her to stick to her orders. She was supposed to be the eyes in the sky, nothing more. But her conscience told her something different. These weren't just soldiers down there. They were fathers, husbands, sons. They had families waiting for them back home, people who would never see them again if someone didn't act. She thought about her own family. Her younger brother Diego was a Marine currently deployed in Iraq. What would she want someone to do if he were trapped and dying in some foreign compound? The answer came to her immediately. She would want that person to do everything in their power to bring him home alive. The enemy fighters seemed to be coordinating their attack with practiced efficiency. They moved in teams of 3 or 4, covering each other as they advanced on the SEAL positions. Maya counted at least 15 fighters on the upper levels of the compound, raining down fire on the trapped Americans below. Another 12 or more were moving through the ground level, trying to flank the SEAL team from both sides. Maya's radio suddenly crackled to life. Overwatch, this is command. What's your status? It was Colonel Barnes, his voice tight with concern. Command, this is Overwatch, Maya responded, keeping her voice steady. I count approximately 30 enemy fighters in the compound. The SEAL team is trapped in the main courtyard, taking heavy fire from multiple directions. I can see at least 3 wounded who need immediate medical attention. There was a long pause before Barnes responded. Overwatch, maintain your position. We're calling air support, but it's going to take at least 40 minutes to get birds in the air. 40 minutes. Maya's heart sank. The SEALs didn't have 40 minutes. They might not have 4 minutes at this rate. She watched as another SEAL tried to move to help his wounded teammate and was immediately forced back by a hail of bullets. Command, I don't think they have 40 minutes, Maya said into radio. They're getting overrun down there. Negative, Overwatch. You maintain your position. That's a direct order. Air support is en route. Maya stared through her scope at the unfolding disaster. The SEALs were some of the most elite soldiers in the world, but They were outnumbered 3-1 and trapped in a kill zone. She could see their ammunition was running low by the way they were conserving their shots. Soon they would be completely defenseless. She thought about the oath she had taken when she enlisted, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. But more than that, she thought about the oath she had taken to herself, to never leave a fellow soldier behind. The SEALs weren't technically her unit, but they were her brothers in arms. Maya made her decision. She began breaking down her position, gathering her gear, and checking her weapon. She had 6 magazines for her M4A1, plus her sidearm with 3 magazines. It wasn't much against 30 enemy fighters, but it would have to be enough. As she prepared to move, she looked one more time through her scope. One of the wounded SEALs was trying to crawl to safety, leaving a trail of blood behind him. An enemy fighter appeared at an upper window, taking aim at the wounded man. Maya didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger, and the enemy fighter dropped from view. The sound of her shot echoed across the valley, and she knew there was no turning back now. She had just disobeyed a direct order from her commanding officer. But as she shouldered her pack and began her descent toward the compound, Maya felt no regret. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. Sometimes being a good soldier meant being a bad subordinate. The mountain path was treacherous in the darkness, but Maya had trained in terrain like this her entire career. She moved quickly but carefully, using every piece of cover available. The enemy fighters were focused on the SEALs in the compound, which gave her the element of surprise. As she got closer, she could hear the chatter of automatic weapons and the occasional explosion of a grenade. The battle was intensifying, and time was running out. Maya checked her gear one final time and began planning her approach to the compound. She had grown up believing that heroes were people who did extraordinary things in extraordinary circumstances. But as she prepared to enter that compound against overwhelming odds, Maya realized that sometimes being a hero simply meant doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. The mission had gone wrong, but Maya Rodriguez was determined to make it right, even if it meant risking everything she had worked for in her military career. The lives of 12 Navy SEALs hung in the balance, and she was the only one in position to help them. As she moved through the darkness toward the compound, Maya whispered a prayer for strength and accuracy. She was about to face the fight of her life. Maya reached the outer perimeter of the compound just as another wounded SEAL collapsed in the courtyard. Through the chain-link fence, she could see the full scope of the disaster unfolding. The enemy had set up a perfect ambush, using the compound's architecture to create multiple firing positions that covered every possible escape route. The SEAL team leader, a lieutenant commander she recognized from a briefing, was trying to coordinate his men's defense while applying pressure to a wounded teammate's leg. Blood was spreading across the concrete, dark and ominous in the moonlight. 2 other SEALs were completely motionless, and Maya couldn't tell if they were unconscious or worse. She counted her ammunition again. 6 magazines for her primary weapon, 3 for her sidearm, plus 2 fragmentation grenades. Against 30 well-armed fighters in a fortified position, it wasn't nearly enough for a frontal assault. But Maya had never been the type to choose the obvious approach. Her radio crackled again. "Overwatch, report your position immediately." Colonel Barnes sounded angry now, probably realizing that she wasn't responding from her assigned location. Maya turned the radio off. She couldn't afford the distraction, and she definitely couldn't afford to explain what she was about to do. Barnes would order her to fall back, and she would have to choose between obeying orders and saving lives. She had already made that choice. The compound was built into the mountainside in 3 distinct levels. The upper level housed what appeared to be living quarters and storage areas, where at least 12 enemy fighters had positioned themselves with clear fields of fire down into the courtyard. The middle level contained the main buildings where the SEALs had been trapped, and the lower level opened into the courtyard where the wounded lay exposed. Maya studied the layout carefully, looking for weaknesses in the enemy's position. They had concentrated their forces to create overlapping fields of fire, but that concentration also created blind spots. If she could get into the compound through one of those blind spots, she might be able to attack from an unexpected angle. The eastern wall of the compound had partially collapsed in some previous conflict, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. More importantly, it was positioned behind a water tank that would provide cover from the upper-level fighters. The gap was about 50 meters from her current position, across open ground that would leave her exposed for precious seconds. Maya checked her watch. The SEALs have been trapped for almost 30 minutes now. Even if air support arrived on schedule, which was never guaranteed, they would still need another 10 minutes to assess the situation and clear the area for engagement. The wounded men didn't have that much time. She thought about her father's words again. Sometimes the right choice isn't the safe choice, Maya. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save something more important than yourself. Maya had joined the army not for glory or adventure, but because she believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The SEALs were elite warriors, but even they had limits. Right now, they needed help, and she was the only one in position to provide it. She began her approach to the gap in the wall, moving in a low crouch and using every available piece of cover. The sound of gunfire from the compound helped mask the noise of her movement. A large boulder provided concealment for the first 20 meters. Then, she would have to sprint across an open patch of ground to reach the collapsed section of wall. As she prepared for the final dash, Maya saw one of the enemy fighters appear at a window on the upper level, scanning the area with night vision goggles. She froze, pressing herself against the boulder, and waited. After what felt like an eternity, the fighter moved away from the window. Maya sprinted across the open ground, her heart pounding in her ears. Every step felt like it took forever, and she expected to hear the crack of rifle fire at any moment. But she reached the collapsed wall without being detected, squeezing through the gap and finding herself inside the compound's outer perimeter. The first thing that hit her was the smell. Cordite from the gunpowder, mixed with dust, and something else she didn't want to identify. The second thing was the noise. Inside the compound, the sound of automatic weapons was deafening, echoing off the concrete walls and creating a cacophony that made communication nearly impossible. Maya could see the SEAL team's position more clearly now. They had managed to create a defensive perimeter using concrete barriers and an overturned vehicle, but they were completely pinned down. Every time one of them tried to move, bullets sparked off the concrete around them. The enemy fighters were positioned in a rough horseshoe shape around the courtyard, with the open end facing the mountains. It was a clever trap, designed to funnel the SEALs into a kill zone with no escape route. But it also meant that most of the enemy fighters had their backs to Maya's position. She identified her first target, a fighter with an RPG launcher positioned on a balcony overlooking the courtyard. He was preparing to fire into the SEAL position, which would be devastating in such a confined space. Maya raised her rifle, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean, and the fighter toppled forward, the RPG launcher clattering to the ground below. But the sound of her rifle immediately drew attention from other fighters. Shouts echoed across the compound as the enemy realized they were under attack from a new direction. Maya didn't waste time celebrating. She moved quickly to a new position, using a concrete pillar for cover as return fire began to pepper the area where she had been hiding. The element of surprise was gone, but she had achieved her primary objective, diverting enemy attention away from the trapped SEALs. She could see the SEAL team leader looking in her direction, confusion evident even from a distance. He couldn't identify who was shooting at the enemy fighters, but he was smart enough to take advantage of the distraction. He began organizing his men to move the wounded to better cover. Maya's second shot took down another enemy fighter who was trying to flank the SEAL position. Her third shot shattered the weapon of a fighter who was pouring automatic fire into the courtyard. Each shot was carefully placed, designed to maximum disruption with minimum ammunition expenditure. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. At least 8 fighters turned their attention to her position, filling the air around her with bullets. Concrete chips exploded from the pillar she was hiding behind, and she could feel the heat of bullets passing close to her head. But Maya had accomplished something important. For the first time since the ambush began, the SEALs had breathing room. She watched as two of them managed to reach their wounded teammates and begin dragging them to safety. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Maya reloaded quickly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had committed herself to this course of action, and there was no backing out now. The only way forward was through the enemy positions, and the only way to save the SEALs was to keep fighting. She thought about her mother, who had always worried about her daughter's choice to join the military. "Promise me you'll be careful," she had said at the airport when Maya deployed for the first time. "Promise me you'll come home." Maya had made that promise, and she intended to keep it. But first, she had to make sure 12 other mothers got their sons back home safely. Sometimes keeping one promise meant risking another. As enemy fire intensified around her position, Maya prepared for the next phase of her unauthorized rescue mission. She had gotten their attention. Now she had to use it. Maya's position behind the concrete pillar was becoming untenable. Enemy fire was intensifying, and she could hear fighters moving to flank her from both sides. Chunks of concrete were raining down around her as automatic weapons chipped away at her cover. She had maybe 30 seconds before her position would be completely compromised. She pulled one of her fragmentation grenades from her belt, calculating the distance to the cluster of enemy fighters on the upper level. The throw would have to be perfect, and she would be exposed for several critical seconds while making it. But it was her best chance to create enough confusion to move to a new position. Maya counted to 3, then rolled out from behind the pillar and hurled the grenade in a high arc toward the upper level. She didn't wait to see where it landed. She was already sprinting toward a damaged section of wall that would provide new cover. The explosion came just as she dove behind the rubble, and the screams of wounded fighters told her the grenade had found its mark. From her new position, Maya could see that the SEAL team had managed to move 3 of their wounded teammates to better cover. But they were still trapped, and now they were taking fire from enemy reinforcements who had appeared from deeper within the compound. The situation was stabilizing in the enemy's favor again. Maya studied the compound's layout from her new angle. She could see a stairway leading to the upper level, currently unguarded because the fighters were focused on the courtyard battle. If she could reach those stairs and get to the upper level, she could attack the enemy positions from behind and force them to divide their attention even further. But reaching the stairs meant crossing 20 meters of open ground under direct fire from at least 6 enemy positions. It was nearly suicidal, but Maya was running out of options. The longer this battle dragged on, the more likely it was that the enemy would receive reinforcements or that the wounded SEALs would succumb to their injuries. She checked her ammunition for magazines remaining for her primary weapon, plus her sidearm. She had used her shots carefully, but the enemy's numerical advantage was becoming more apparent with each passing minute. Every bullet had to count from here on. Maya waited for a lull in the enemy fire, then sprinted toward the stairway. Immediately, shouts echoed across the compound as fighters spotted her movement. Bullets whined past her head, and she felt one tug at her sleeve as she ran. But she reached the base of the stairs without being hit. The stairway was narrow and steep, carved directly into the rock face of the mountain. It provided some protection from below, but Maya knew that if an enemy fighter appeared at the top while she was climbing, she would be completely exposed. She started up the steps 2 at a time, her rifle ready. Halfway up the stairs, she heard footsteps above her. Someone was coming down to investigate. Maya pressed herself against the rock wall and waited. A fighter appeared at the turn in the stairway. His AK-47 pointed downward. Maya's shot took him center mass, and he tumbled down the steps past her. She continued climbing, reaching the upper level just as the enemy fighters began to realize what was happening. Maya found herself on a narrow walkway that connected several buildings, with clear views down into the courtyard where the SEALs were trapped. The first enemy fighter she encountered was so focused on shooting into the courtyard that he never saw her coming. Maya's shot was silent and efficient, dropping him immediately. She moved to his position and began engaging other fighters along the walkway. From the upper level, Maya had a tactical advantage she hadn't possessed on the ground. She could see the entire enemy disposition, and, more importantly, she could attack them from an angle they weren't defending. Her shots began taking a serious toll on the enemy forces. But her success on the upper level came at a cost. Enemy fighters from the ground level were now climbing stairs at both ends of the walkway, trying to trap her in the middle. Maya found herself fighting a two-front battle with rapidly diminishing ammunition. She fell back to a defensive position in one of the upper-level buildings, using the doorway as a choke point. The building appeared to be some kind of storage facility filled with crates and equipment that provided excellent cover. But it was also a potential trap if the enemy managed to surround the building. Through a window, Maya could see that her efforts were having the desired effect. The SEAL team was using the distraction to organize a more effective defense, and they had managed to establish a more secure perimeter around their wounded. But they were still pinned down, and Maya was rapidly running out of ammunition. She heard voices in the corridor outside her position. At least 3 fighters were coordinating an assault on her room. Maya positioned herself behind a large crate, aimed at the doorway, and waited. The first fighter through the door walked directly into her sights. Her shot dropped him immediately, but the sound revealed her position to the others. Automatic gunfire filled the room, and Maya had to keep her head down as bullets shredded the air above her. Maya pulled her second grenade from her belt. She cooked it for 2 seconds, then rolled it toward the doorway. The explosion was deafening in the confined space, and when the smoke cleared, the doorway was empty. But she could hear more fighters moving in the corridor. Her radio suddenly crackled to life. She had forgotten to turn it off after ignoring Colonel Barnes earlier. Any station, this is Reaper 2-1, inbound for close air support. Request target designation. Air support had arrived early. Maya felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by a new problem. The close air support couldn't engage enemy positions without risking the trapped SEALs, and there was no forward air controller in position to guide the strike safely. Maya realized she might be able to serve as an impromptu forward air controller from her position. She had the training, and she could see both the friendly and enemy positions clearly. But it would mean revealing her location to her commanding officers, which would certainly result in a court-martial if she survived this battle. She keyed her radio. Reaper 2-1, this is an observer in position at the target compound. I can provide terminal guidance for your strikes. There was a pause. Observer, identify yourself and your authorization for terminal guidance. Maya hesitated. Once she provided her identity, there would be no hiding what she had done. But the lives of 12 SEALs hung in the balance, and the air support represented their best chance of survival. Reaper 2-1, this is Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, acting as forward observer. I do not have authorization for this mission, but I have clear eyes on friendly and enemy positions. Another pause, longer this time. Then, Rodriguez, be advised your commanding officer is currently requesting your immediate extraction and court-martial. But we have wounded friendlies who need help. Can you guide us in? Maya smiled grimly. Even if she faced a court-martial, at least someone was willing to prioritize the mission over military protocol. Affirmative, Reaper 2-1. I can guide you in. Stand by for target coordinates. As she prepared to direct the airstrikes, Maya heard more enemy fighters moving through the building. Her ammunition was running critically low, and she was surrounded by hostile forces. But for the first time since the battle began, she felt like the SEALs had a real chance of making a home. She just had to stay alive long enough to guide the air strikes accurately. And with enemy fighters closing in on her position, that was becoming increasingly unlikely. Maya pressed herself against the concrete wall as enemy fighters moved through the building, searching for her. She could hear at least 4 different voices speaking in hushed tones, coordinating their search. Her ammunition was down to her last magazine for the primary weapon, plus her sidearm. Every shot from here on had to be perfect. Reaper 2-1, I need you to hold off on those strikes for 60 seconds, she whispered into her radio. I have enemy forces danger close to my position. Copy, observer. Be advised we're tracking multiple heat signatures in your building. Are you able to move to a safer location for terminal guidance? Maya looked around the storage room. There was only one way in or out, and enemy fighters were positioned in the corridor beyond. Moving wasn't an option. Negative, Reaper 2-1. I'm going to have to work from here. She could hear footsteps getting closer. The enemy fighters were being methodical, checking each room systematically. They knew she was trapped in the building, and they were taking their time to avoid walking into an ambush. Maya positioned herself behind the largest crate in the room, with a clear view of the doorway. She switched her rifle to semi-automatic to conserve ammunition and controlled her breathing. Her father had taught her that precision shooting was as much mental as physical. Control your mind, control your breathing, control your shot, he used to say. The first fighter appeared in the doorway cautiously, scanning the room with his weapon ready. Maya's shot took him in the center of his chest, and he dropped immediately. But his fall alerted the others to her exact position. Automatic gunfire erupted from the corridor, forcing Maya to keep her head down as bullets shredded the crates around her. She could hear the fighters shouting to each other, coordinating their assault. They were going to rush her position simultaneously from multiple angles. Maya pulled out her sidearm and placed it within easy reach. When her rifle ran empty, she would need to transition quickly. She also positioned her last grenade where she could grab it instantly. If the enemy fighters made it into the room, she would use it as a last resort, even if it meant taking herself out with them. Reaper 2-1, what's your station time? She asked into her radio. We can stay on station for another 20 minutes, observer. How copy? 20 minutes was more than enough time to complete the airstrikes, assuming Maya could stay alive that long. She calculated angles and distances, identifying the priority targets that would give the SEALs their best chance of escape. The enemy fighters were moving again. Maya could hear them positioning themselves on either side of the doorway, preparing for a coordinated assault. She aimed at the center of the doorway and waited. Two fighters appeared simultaneously, one diving left and the other right. Maya's first shot caught the left fighter as he moved, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a stack of crates. Her second shot missed the right fighter, who managed to get behind cover on the far side of the room. Now she was trapped in a crossfire. The fighter across the room had a clear angle on her position, and she could hear more fighters moving in the corridor. Maya switched to her sidearm and prepared for close-quarters combat. But before the enemy could coordinate their next assault, Maya heard a familiar sound, the whine of incoming artillery rounds. The SEALs below had managed to call in indirect fire support, and the shells were landing dangerously close to the building she was in. The explosions shook the entire structure, and Maya heard screams from the corridor as enemy fighters were caught in the barrage. Dust and debris filled the air, and for a moment, the shooting stopped completely. Maya used the confusion to move to a new position near the window. From there, she could see the SEAL team situation more clearly. The artillery had scattered the enemy fighters in the courtyard, and the SEALs were using the opportunity to consolidate their position and treat their wounded. But the artillery strikes had also damaged parts of the compound, creating new obstacles and changing the tactical situation. Maya needed to reassess target priorities for the airstrikes. Reaper 2-1, I'm going to need you to adjust your attack pattern, she said in her radio. The friendlies have shifted position due to indirect fire. Copy, observer. Send your new coordinates when ready. Maya studied the battlefield below. The enemy fighters have been scattered, but not eliminated. They were regrouping in 3 distinct clusters, each of which posed a significant threat to the SEAL extraction. She would need to guide the airstrikes precisely to eliminate these threats without endangering the American forces. The fighter who had been trapped in a room with her was moving again, trying to get a clear shot at her new position. Maya waited until he exposed himself, then put 2 rounds from her sidearm into his torso. He dropped immediately, but the sound of her shots drew attention from the corridor. More fighters were coming. Maya could hear their voices, angry now and determined to eliminate her. She was down to her sidearm and 1 grenade, facing an unknown number of enemy combatants in a confined space. But the SEALs below were alive, and air support was standing by to provide the cover they needed for extraction. Maya had accomplished her primary mission. Now she just needed to complete the terminal guidance for the airstrikes. Reaper 2-1, I'm going to transmit target coordinates now, she said in her radio. Be advised, I have enemy forces moving on my position. If I stop responding, proceed with the strikes as planned. Negative, observer. We're not conducting strikes with American personnel in danger close proximity. Maya understood the pilot's concern, but she also understood that the window of opportunity was closing rapidly. If the airstrikes didn't happen soon, the enemy would regroup and the SEALs would be trapped again. Reaper 2-1, that's a direct order from the terminal guidance controller, she said, using formal military protocol to emphasize her authority. You will conduct strikes on my coordinates regardless of my status. 12 American lives depend on it. There was a long pause before the pilot responded. Copy, observer. Understood. Send your coordinates. Maya began transmitting the target information, speaking quickly but clearly as enemy fighters moved through the building toward her position. She could hear them in the adjacent rooms now, systematically clearing each space as they approached her location. As she finished transmitting the coordinates for the first target, Maya heard footsteps directly outside her door. She raised her sidearm and prepared for the final confrontation of the battle. The outcome of the rescue mission now depended on her ability to stay alive just long enough for the airstrikes to eliminate the enemy positions. 12 Navy SEALs were counting on her, and Maya Rodriguez had never failed a mission yet. The first airstrike hit exactly on target, sending a massive fireball erupting from the enemy position on the compound's eastern wall. Maya felt the building shake as the explosion echoed across the mountainside. Through her window, she could see enemy fighters scattering in confusion, their coordinated defense finally beginning to collapse. But her victory was short-lived. 3 enemy fighters burst through the doorway of her room simultaneously, their weapons blazing. Maya dubbed behind the crate as automatic gunfire filled the air around her. She returned fire with her sidearm, catching one fighter in the shoulder and sending him spinning to the ground. Reaper 2-1, target eliminated, adjust fire to coordinates Bravo, she called in her radio while bullets shredded the air above her head. She had practiced calling in air strikes under fire during training, but the real thing was infinitely more terrifying than any simulation. The second fighter was trying to flank her position, moving along the wall toward her cover. Maya waited until he committed to his movement, then put 2 rounds center mass. He dropped immediately, his weapon clattering across the concrete floor. The third fighter had taken cover behind debris near the doorway and was laying down suppressive fire to keep Maya pinned. She could hear more fighters moving through the building, drawn by the sound of gunfire. Her ammunition was critically low, and she was running out of time. Target Bravo destroyed. Moving to Target Charlie came the voice of Reaper 2-1. The second airstrike hit the compound's western defensive position, and Maya could see through her window that the enemy's organized resistance was finally crumbling. The SEAL team below was using the airstrikes as cover to begin their extraction. Maya watched as they formed up in a defensive formation, carrying their wounded teammates toward the compound's main exit. For the first time since the battle began, they looked like they might actually make it out alive. But Maya's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The fighter near the doorway was advancing on her position, and she could hear at least 2 more fighters moving through adjacent rooms. Her sidearm had 4 rounds remaining, not nearly enough to fight her way out of the building. Maya made a decision that went against every survival instinct she possessed. She pulled the pin from her last grenade, held it for 2 seconds to cook off the timer, then threw it toward the doorway where the fighters were concentrated. Fire in the hole, she shouted, then pressed herself against the floor behind the crate. The explosion was devastating in the confined space. When the smoke cleared, the doorway was blocked with debris, and the immediate threat was eliminated. But Maya could hear voices from other parts of the building, and she knew more fighters would find another way to reach her. Her radio crackled with urgent traffic. All stations, this is Rescue 16, inbound for casualty evacuation. Request immediate clearance for landing zone Alpha. The rescue helicopters had arrived. Maya felt a surge of relief, knowing that the wounded SEALs would soon receive proper medical attention. But she also realized that her own extraction was far from guaranteed. She was trapped in an enemy-controlled building with no ammunition and no way out. Reaper 2-1, I need you to put your final strike on the building I'm currently occupying, Maya said in her radio, her voice calm despite the circumstances. Negative, Observer. We will not conduct strikes on American personnel. Listen to me carefully, Maya replied. There are at least 15 enemy fighters still in this building, and they're going to regroup and attack the landing zone. The SEALs need time to load their wounded and extract safely. Put ordnance on this building. There was a long pause. Maya could hear the rescue helicopters approaching, their rotors beating against the mountain air. The sound was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Observer, we're tracking your radio signature in that building. Confirm you're requesting strikes on your own position. Maya looked around the devastated room. The walls were pocked with bullet holes, debris was scattered everywhere, and the smell of cordite was overwhelming. She thought about her family back home, about the promises she had made to return safely. But she also thought about the 12 Navy SEALs who were finally getting their chance to escape this nightmare. Their families would see them again because of the choice she was about to make. Affirmative, Reaper 2-1. I am requesting immediate strikes on my building to prevent enemy interference with the casualty evacuation. Execute the mission. Before the pilot could respond, Maya heard new voices approaching through the building. The enemy fighters had found another route to her position, and they were closing in rapidly. She had perhaps 30 seconds before they would overwhelm her location. Maya switched her radio to the emergency frequency and made her final transmission. Any station, this is Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez. Tell my family I love them, and tell the Navy SEALs it was an honor to serve alongside them. But just as she prepared for the final assault, Maya heard a sound that changed everything. The distinctive roar of American helicopters opening fire with their door guns. The rescue team wasn't just extracting the SEALs. They were providing close air support to suppress the remaining enemy fighters. Heavy machine gun fire raked the building Maya was trapped in, forcing the approaching enemy fighters to take cover. Through her window, she could see Apache attack helicopters circling the compound, their cannons systematically eliminating the remaining threats. Observer, this is Rescue 16, came a new voice on her radio. We have eyes on your building and are moving to extract you. Can you signal your location? Maya used the reflection from her rifle scope to flash sunlight toward the rescue helicopter, indicating her position. Within minutes, she heard boots on the stairs and American voices calling her name. The rescue team found her surrounded by debris and empty shell casings, but alive and uninjured. As they helped her down the stairs and toward the landing zone, Maya could see the 12 Navy SEALs being loaded into medical helicopters. All 12 were alive, though several were seriously wounded. During the helicopter ride back to base, Maya sat in silence, processing what had happened. She had disobeyed direct orders, engaged in unauthorized combat, and called in airstrikes without proper authorization. By any military standard, she had committed serious violations that would likely result in court-martial proceedings. But as she looked at the wounded SEALs receiving medical attention, Maya felt no regret. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. Sometimes being a good soldier meant being a bad subordinate. 3 days later, Maya stood at attention in Colonel Barnes' office, waiting to hear the consequences of her actions. The colonel looked at her for a long moment before speaking. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Your actions during the compound assault were completely unauthorized and represented a serious breach of military discipline, he said formally. Maya braced herself for the court-martial proceedings she knew were coming. However, Barnes continued, those same actions resulted in the successful rescue of 12 Navy SEALs who would otherwise have been killed or captured. The SEAL team commander has recommended you for the Silver Star, and the Pentagon has agreed. Maya felt her knees go weak. Sir, sometimes, Sergeant, the best soldiers are the ones who know when to ignore their orders. You showed exceptional courage and tactical judgment under impossible circumstances. The military needs more soldiers like you, not fewer. 6 months later, Maya Rodriguez received the Silver Star in a ceremony attended by all 12 of the Navy SEALs she had helped rescue. As she stood on the stage, looking out at their families and her own, Maya realized that heroes weren't people who never felt afraid. Heroes were people who felt afraid and acted anyway because something was more important than their fear. Sometimes that something was duty. Sometimes it was honor. And sometimes it was just doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. The 12 SEALs went home to their families. Their children grew up with fathers, and their wives never had to face the knock on the door that every military spouse dreads. Maya Rodriguez had made that possible by choosing conscience over protocol, courage over caution. In her acceptance speech, Maya dedicated her medal to every service member who had ever faced an impossible choice and chosen to do what was right instead of what was safe. The real heroes, she said, weren't the people who followed orders without question. They were the people who understood that sometimes saving lives meant risking everything you had worked for. Sometimes being a good soldier meant being willing to face a court-martial for doing what your conscience demanded. Maya Rodriguez had learned that lesson in a compound in Afghanistan, surrounded by enemy fighters and armed with nothing but her rifle and her determination to bring 12 Navy SEALs home alive. And she had succeeded.